Now, earlier on, it was reported that the former president could possibly be taken to the Westville Correctional Centre. That is where our reporter Karinda was earlier on, where we saw a small group of former President Jacob Zuma's supporters trickling in there at the entrance. But there are new developments. It seems now the indications that he'll be taken to the Estcourt Correctional Centre. That is where Karinda is live. Now, Karinda, that is, of course, the latest coming through on the feeds. What are you seeing there?
Yes, well, good evening to you. Indeed, like you said, there were new developments now that the former President Jacob Zuma, upon his imminent arrest, will be incarcerated instead here at the Estcourt prison. Now, we have just arrived here to see that the actual road that the prison building is on has been cordoned off. At this stage, the number of correctional services officers, I'm unsure if you can actually see Pilani Zuma's behind the camera now, have actually even at one point came to us to tell us that we are a security risk and we should not be here. They're not allowing us to be close to the facility. We managed to drive up close to the front of the building, just about 500 meters or so away from where we are now, to see that there were a number of Correctional Services Department officials outside. They were armed. We saw at least 4 armed men on just outside the building itself, and then more officials inside. And what I can tell you is on the ground here in Estcourt, specifically at this Correctional Services Centre, this prison, there is a hive of activity. And even just on the road coming up, there is a police vehicle there as well, an unmarked police van there as well. So what I can tell you is definitely the developments on the ground that we hear that Zuma could be incarcerated at Estcourt. There seems to be some more concrete evidence behind this, as we're seeing the kind of activity that we're seeing on the ground. We can't bring you closer because I can tell you that it is quite tense, even though we are the only people here, aside from the Correctional Services Department officials. There's a tense atmosphere. As soon as we came to them, we got off our vehicles to introduce ourselves to them. They were very perplexed as to what was happening and what was the situation that was unfolding. So they are on high alert at this point, and we understand, of course, there are developments as well. In Nkandla, the clock is ticking. We know for the deadline for the execution of Zuma's arrest. I must also tell you that this court, or rather this prison, is a relatively new prison. It was actually opened in 2019, costing about 387 million rand, and the construction of this was because the previous iron structure, there was overcrowding in that structure. But we understand that this specific facility has a medical wing. We know that the former president has raised concerns about the impact that incarceration would have on his life, especially during the pandemic. And so, of course, perhaps because he is of a vulnerable age, and perhaps because he is a prominent political figure, he could be given some preferential treatment here at this specific medical wing of this specific prison here in Estcourt in the KZN Midlands. It's quite a distance away from Nkandla, perhaps just over 2 hours, but if the president is indeed arrested before or on the deadline for that to happen tonight, we can assume that there would be blue light vehicles that would escort that convoy here to Estcourt. It's unclear, though, that when the president is here at the Estcourt prison, if indeed he does come here, is brought here, it's unclear how much time he would spend here, or whether he would then be transferred to the Westville prison. But for now, what I can tell you is something is indeed happening here in Estcourt, judging by the atmosphere, especially around the Correctional Services Department officials here on the ground.
All right, Karinda, Jack Mohan, do you know what has happened to the crowd that was gathered at Westville at this point?
Yes, actually around 9 o'clock, we were there at around 9 o'clock. A single Metro police vehicle came to the prison, And then we just essentially saw that small group, less than about 15 supporters, who were demonstrating outside that
Karinda
prison in Westville, Durban.
Just hold on a sec. I see movement, a motorcade leaving Nkandla at this point. Let's take you live to our reporter, Ziyanda Mohan. Karinda Jack Mohan, you're about 2 hours away from Nkandla, you're saying, so not likely to be seeing that motorcade just yet.
Indeed. Well, good evening to you. I've confirmed 3 hours away from Nkandla. Like our politics editor Spoon Galwa has said, this is a historic moment indeed. A convoy of SUVs have left Nkandla. We do not know whether the former president, Jacob Zuma, is seated in one of those SUVs heading towards Estcourt. But we're on the ground here, looking out, listening out for any sirens, looking out for vehicles. But if I can explain to you, it's extremely tense. The town of Estcourt, quite a small town. It's a ghost town, of course, because of the lockdown regulations. But just on the road outside the Estcourt Correctional Centre, in about half a kilometre away from us where we are, there are 2 vehicles still blocking the road, correctional services vehicles. At least 4 officials there from the Correctional Services Department. They have bulletproof vests on and they are armed. It's unclear whether those are rubber bullets. They've cordoned off that portion of the road. And then when we tried to go around to the other side of the road to get closer to the prison, we were told that we were not allowed, or we were not given permission to be there. They said it's a highly sensitive time at this point. And I mean, it is 11 o'clock at night, but the situation there was almost as if it was, you know, sometime around 5 or 6 o'clock in terms of the number of officials that are there, clearly preempting and waiting. And of course, we understand in anticipation of the former president. Like our politics editor Spoon Galwa has said, that at first, when Judge Sisi Kampepe handed down that constitutional court judgment that we see really the consequences of that now, she signed a warrant of committal which said that Zuma should serve that 15-month jail time at the Durban prison, or the Westville Correctional Centre. That's the same place where Zuma's once ally, Shabir Sheikh, a former financial advisor of his, had actually been incarcerated before being released on medical parole for quite some time now. But instead, we understand new information on the ground is that instead Zuma would come here to this Estcourt prison rather, and we do understand from some sources is that he may be placed in a newly revamped medical wing here. I said earlier that this prison is actually a relatively new facility. It was opened and launched in 2019. It's a multi-million rand facility that was built because of overcrowding and poor conditions at the previous facility. So you must imagine that the cells here, the facilities here, will be in much better condition than what one would find at the Westville Correctional Facility. And we have, over the past day, really asked the Department of Correctional Services about the treatment that the former president would receive. The Department of Correctional Services spokesperson Singabako Nxumalo told Newzroom Afrika that the former president would not receive any preferential treatment, and he said in previous media interviews as well that the process, as with any inmate, is once they come to prison, they undergo an assessment, a mental health assessment, as well as a security and risk vulnerability assessment before being processed and ultimately handed those orange overalls to begin serving their sentence. That's what we expect to see happen to the former president if indeed, according to what we're seeing happening to Nkandla, is leading up to his arrest, the deadline for which is in a matter of about half an hour. So we will be posted out here. And I must also tell you that there are routine patrols by police officers. 2 police vehicles have already passed us now, one marked and one unmarked vehicle that was also parked at the bottom of this road here. So what I can tell you is that in this relatively small ghost town, things are becoming very tense outside the prison where the former president is expected to be incarcerated, the first that we are seeing in our country's democratic history.
Now, Karinda Jack Mohan, is that generally a busy road with a lot of movement, and are the roadblocks there stopping cars from driving past?
We have not seen or went through any roadblocks, even from traveling from Durban here to Estcourt. It's about just over a 2-hour travel. We didn't see any roadblocks, and we weren't even stopped ourselves. This specific road that I'm on, it's a quiet road. We're seeing that it's also a truck stop at the end of it. What I can tell you is that on a normal day, this is simply just a road where there's a prison in a small community in the KZN Midlands, a newly revamped prison that is. But today is, or rather tonight, is the reason why it's, I'd say, busy, not in the terms of the number of people, but busy because of the anticipation of the officers that we are seeing, just watching everything unfold. We are the only team that is here on the ground in Estcourt. I'm not seeing any supporters or any protesters as well. But also at the same time, we know that over the past week, supporters of the former president have said that they're willing to physically defend the arrest of Jacob Zuma. We saw those SUVs leave Nkandla seemingly without much of a volatile situation created, but it's unclear. Perhaps my colleagues on the ground in Nkandla still, they've been there for this week, can provide some direction as well as to whether supporters who were there, the small group that have gathered there tonight, whether they'd be leaving that premises as well and also taking that turn to come here to this specific Midlands town. At the moment, though, it's quiet on the ground as really we await to just even hear those sirens and give you a notice as to whether or not this is the sign of Jacob Zuma coming to the Estcourt prison to start serving 15 months of his jail sentence.
Karinda live for us there outside the Estcourt Correctional Centre.